Coming up on this episode of Harmless.
They taught me how to do push-ups, how to run a breathalyzer, how to polish boots, how to drive a car. They didn't teach me how to deal with an officer down. I just sit there for a minute and I'll think to myself, I've got 2 young daughters. Pictures were of young girls. I don't think I can do this. Some weeks 80 hours, some weeks 40. When it's time to work, it's time to work. But you need to give yourself permission to go home and be at home. We ask, what can I do as an instructor to make you successful? One of the guys in the class said, I can't do this. And I am so proud of that guy. Do whatever it takes to take care of yourself. If that's running, working out, cooking, if it's your family, whatever it takes. You have all the tools that you need to be successful at this. I sat up in my chair and I said out loud, if I'm not, who is? Let's go.
Welcome to Harmless, the podcast. I'm your host. Welcome to Harmless, the podcast. I'm your host, Eric Oldenburg. And today, I have a very special guest with me. His name is Jay Houston. Jay Houston is the Director of Training for the Child Rescue Coalition. But more importantly, Jay is a retired ICAC commander from the state of Mississippi. Jay is one of the most beautiful human beings that I've ever had the privilege to know, and I'm so grateful that he took the time to speak with me and have an incredibly compelling conversation for my podcast. I will tell you that Jay is probably my biggest fan of this podcast. Jay has been incredibly supportive and enthusiastic about this podcast, and now I am so incredibly grateful that he is a guest on this podcast. So without further ado, I give you A Helping Heart with Jay Houston. All right, this is absolutely a wonderful day for me today. I have my very good friend with me, Jay Houston. Jay and I met years ago. We saw each other throughout the ICAC world, and I remember coming to see you teach one day in Jackson. It took me about 30 seconds to realize that you are a fabulous instructor, and you lead with intimacy and vulnerability, and you connect with people. I worked with fantastic instructors, but when it comes to human connection, I think you're at the top of the list. Jay is one of those people that no matter how big the shit sandwich you have to eat is, Jay will do it with a smile on his face, and he'll remind you to keep a smile on your face while you're doing it. That is something that is very rare in law enforcement, an infectious, positive attitude, and Jay always has that, and his really cool accent makes it even better to bring the levity. But I don't know anybody in the world who hasn't met Jay Houston and was not absolutely impressed when they walked away. So Jay, thank you so much, my friend, for being here. This really means a lot to me.
Thank you, brother. That was a great introduction. Let me start by saying thank you to you for doing this podcast. If I can a little bit, we have to approach this podcast with vulnerability because cops can smell if you're just saying words to be saying words. I just really appreciate you guys doing this because I firmly believe, listen to your episodes, this is going to help people, not only investigators, forensic examiners, prosecutors in the ICAC world, but also cops all over the world, because with law enforcement, you see and deal with some terrible things.
But I have to say what you just said about leading with vulnerability. To add on to that, when a police officer hears that word, it assumes weakness. It assumes that's what the victims are. The victims are vulnerable. That's why we're going to help them. So then if I'm vulnerable, then that means I'm weak and there's something wrong with me. Like you said, this is all about helping somebody who may be in a situation, they need help, but they don't know how to get it. Their personality won't let them get it. It's weakness. They're scared. They feel shame. Shame is an extremely powerful emotion. Think of a time in your life when you did something very shameful and how bad you felt. Whether other people felt that way or not, we are taught from day one to be strong, powerful, and not show weakness. So how do we show weakness, Jay? How does Jay Houston get his students and the people he works around to show vulnerability? Because vulnerability is strength.
I'm the real relational person. I would always interact with our ICAC affiliates that we had in Mississippi and just reach out to them, see how they were doing. I was either the alternate commander or the ICAC commander for 13 years from Mississippi. I got started in ICAC in January 1st of 2008 and retired in 2021. So it's 13 years.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, brother. So one thing I always did with the affiliate agencies was I would pay attention to them and what kind of person they were. I'm a real relational person. I like to talk. So I would always call the affiliate agencies or my coworkers if I hadn't seen them in a few days and just check in with them and see how they were. And always paid attention to their families and sort of their habits. One situation as a supervisor, I had an employee that was 8 to 5 every day, showed up at 8 o'clock, went home at 5 o'clock every day. Did this for years, no problems. And then he started showing up at 9. Then he started showing up at 10. Well, I went to him, I said, man, what's going on? "I'm just having some issues sleeping." Okay, I can't be here at 8 o'clock. Okay. So we adjusted that person's schedule. So instead of 8 to 5, it was a 9 to 6 kind of deal for him. He started coming in at 9. He was leaving at 6 every day. And then it became 9:30. Then it became 10. And I realized in a short period of time, something was going on. So I went and grabbed him and put him in my car, and me and him drove around. And he told me some health issues he was having that was causing the sleep issues. And he's having a few other things going on at home, and things weren't great. Plus, he was subjected to this terrible material, having to review thousands and thousands of images with 4 other cases in the backlog just waiting for him to get to. And that was running.
That's the thing too, is that a lot of people don't realize this. We're not sitting here complaining like this job destroys you and this job destroys you, just this job. But we have every person in the world, every citizen out there has a level of stress, like a baseline stress level. Work, whether you're an accountant, you're an engineer, you build houses, whatever, you dig ditches, you have a level of stress, right? And even people that do these jobs, they also get to the point where they can't handle their stress anymore. So now take that person who's got his regular issues, family stuff, stressors with money, stressors with work, all kinds of things, pile on top of that. Now that every single day their job is to review and analyze and describe in detail the exploitation of little children, little kids. Okay, maybe that in of itself won't destroy you, but man, cops in general have all kinds of personal issues. We all have. You've encountered serious personal issues in your life. I have in my life. Add on top of this the horrors of, just like you said, not only the image review, but then also that caseload that you can't get to. And knowing you got a case, I remember this. You pull up a case, it's got 100,000 pictures and videos in it. And just as you're getting to the end, right? Maybe an hour or so, you're out of here. It's almost like you don't want to finish because you know the next one's coming. It's almost like you slow down at the very end because you're like, you know what's coming. Because you have to do this all over again.
Yep.
And I was talking with some folks up in Idaho, and as a side note, add on the pressures of retirement. When I retired, Jay, I had to go to 15 or 16 different mandatory meetings about, you need to turn this in, you need to go to fiscal and get this paperwork completed, you need a beneficiary of this, that, turn in your this, turn in your that. How many meetings did I go to where they said, hey, you are about to experience the biggest identity crisis of your life?
Amen.
None. I went to 0 of those. You've been retired for a little bit. I've been retired for a little bit. How many people do you know that have experienced this identity crisis? Every single one of my friends have. But yet it's not addressed. It's not addressed prior to them leaving, especially leaving a job like this. My previous life's purpose was the most purposeful, noble thing I could have ever possibly done, and now it's gone. So add another layer on top of leaving law enforcement, another layer of I can't get to all these children, and it destroyed me. And now I can't think about it because nobody addressed my mental health issues along the way, and I ground myself down to nothing. We are leaving people in this state, and it's not fair. Why are we doing this to the people that are doing things that are protecting the most vulnerable people of our population, and we're leaving them mentally unfit?
Well,
How do we not do this, Jay? How do we get the next generation? How do we mitigate it so that they can leave healthy, Jay? How do we get people to leave healthy?
I can tell you the first thing that I would do is I would mandate mental health counseling. Now, let me clarify. I see ICAC investigators or law enforcement officers just like a regular law enforcement officer is. Now, normal citizens, normal humans, they have a stress level, right? Cops has a higher stress level. The ICAC folks have a higher stress level on top of that. Not only do they have the stress from being a citizen, being a cop, but now they have so much more stress and are subjected to a lot more mental health issues because we're having to, or we've chosen, I should say, to work these cases. And let me lay that foundation for the ICAC people, our child exploitation investigators and forensic examiners and prosecutors. I think that we should mandate mental health counseling for them. The FBI does it, the HSI does it, our federal partners do, where they actually go to someone who is, listen to this word, qualified. That's a big point, qualified, to have discussions with when it comes to this egregious material. They specialize in this field of psychology.
And what is the qualification that they need to have? What sets them apart from any other psychologist? This?
Yep. So psychologists are kind of like, we specialize in certain things. Some specialize in family counseling, some specialize in drug addiction, some specialize in anxiety and depression. There are some that specialize with law enforcement, and there is one mental health facility in Alabama for police officers.
Yeah, you had mentioned that, or somebody had mentioned that. Oh, yeah, that I think that was mentioned in Debbie's thing that he went there. Is that correct? Yeah.
That's correct. So I think we should mandate it.
So you're saying a qualified psychologist has to have some type of experience in this field, and why is that, Jay?
Because they understand the stresses. They understand the stress levels, the added stress to it. They understand the issues that can come from subjecting yourself to this material and
Yeah,
these cases.
and then not only that, but if you pick a regular psychologist who is a family counselor and you bring him in and day one, he has to meet with someone who just watched a baby being raped and brutalized, and then you get this off your chest, you just traumatize that psychologist. So they have to have swum in these waters. They have to have some type of understanding. You don't have to have specific training in looking at images of pictures and videos. If you have any type of history in family abuse, sexual abuse, trauma, that's the people that need to be here helping the people that do this, because like you said, they have to understand the layers, but we certainly don't want to traumatize them with a story and I've done that. I've gone to a psychologist and I tell a story and their eyes just get wider and wider, and then I just realized I traumatized that person.
They could say that you're unfit for duty now because of the point where you are.
Yep.
As a police officer going to see a counselor or a mental health professional, they could designate you as unfit for duty for now.
So what's the fix to make it so that, or how do we begin to make it so that isn't even a thought? Like mental health care and fitness for duty are two completely different things. Is there a way we get there? Because it seems to be, that's the thing we're trying to untangle is, hey, we want mental health support, but it can't be fitness for duty. You have to have levels of qualifications for fitness for duty, right? You have to, or else everybody could be fit. But we got to separate this because this is just mental health and support. So we need to translate that to, hey, I'm doing this job great, but I'm having trouble with this part of it. Let's talk about this part of it then. Not, you can't take it anymore, you're broken, you're not a human, and you just flush you out of the unit. That's what's in there. When I think about a fitness for duty, that's what I think about. Like going in there and saying something like, man, I saw this picture, and then all of a sudden, before you know it, you're reassigned without even any interaction.
So there were 3 or 4 people on our task force that I told them they needed to get out of ICAC for a while. I told them it was time.
What got you to that point? Can you describe the transition? They went from, "Hey, you met them," to now you need to leave?
Yep. I was such good friends with my coworkers in the affiliate agencies that I could really I could call them, have a conversation with them, find out what was going on in their lives, and see that something was going on. And I'll give you just case in point. So we had one affiliate. This guy was a master undercover chatter. He was great at it. That was like his forte. And you've heard this story before. His it works great for a year. All his cases are jam up. And then 6 months later, you start reading over his chats and he gets a little lazy.
Yeah.
And you're like, hey man, you might want to clean this up a little. Go back, read your training manual. You aren't
Yeah.
doing anything wrong, but let's read this again. And then 3 or 4 months later, you get a call from him at the district attorney's office or the prosecutor or U.S. attorney's office, doesn't want to prosecute his cases anymore. You've heard this story before, right? This story that I'm telling.
Yeah.
So as this guy's telling me this, I was so young in my career in ICAC. I started out in 2008 as the alternate ICAC commander. And then a few years after that, after our ICAC commander retired, I was promoted to ICAC commander. Now, our ICAC commander at first, she was an attorney. So she had all of the prosecution. She was over our cybercrime division. So she handled all the budgets and the reports and all that stuff. So I pretty much handled the logistics of our ICAC task force for several years when I was the alternate commander. So I was the one reaching out to our affiliates, and this guy's telling me the story, and it did not register with me that this guy was suffering from burnout. I still think about that guy to this day. And over a period of time, him and the supervisor got in an argument. He got demoted and eventually left the police department. There were some other details I won't go into, but I called him up and I was like, hey man, you probably want to stay away from this for a little while. I think you have some issues going on. And he was like, yeah, I think I do. And that was one.
Do you think that he was okay saying that, yeah, I have issues, when you confronted him with it because he knew who you were as a person and you showed caring from the beginning? Do you think they would have been as receptive if it wasn't you?
I think it was because I had such a relationship with the affiliates. All
I
these
do
people,
too.
these ICAC folks are so near and dear to me. It doesn't matter if you're in Japan or the US, or if you're an ICAC investigator and I find out about it, I'm going to shake your hand.
I love
And
that.
because I had that relationship with these guys, I keep thinking guys and girls, that I could call them up and say it. And I was just honest with them. Hey man, I'm worried about you. Something's going on. What is it? And if they didn't want to tell me, some didn't. If they didn't want to tell me, that's fine, dude. Just know I'm here. If you need something, call me.
You have a unique skill that not a lot of people have. You have it in spades, and that is you hold space. You have this aura about yourself where people feel like it's okay to talk to Jay.
Yep.
That is something that cannot be taught. It's not a class you can go through. You have an open heart. That's what that is. When I see you standing in front of a crowd and you're teaching, I just see this massive heart. And that's what everybody wants. They want to connect with the instructor. How many trainings have you gone through when it's some guy with no personality, some woman with no personality? They get through the blocks and they move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Why not connect with the audience? When I started working for Griffey, I told Johan, I'll be happy to teach everybody as long as you let me talk about mental health. And I weaved it through every single one of my classes. And he was gracious enough to let me do that.
You have to talk about it.
We're all in the foxhole together. We are all in the battle. We show up to that battlefield together every single day. And that is where brotherships and sisterhoods are formed, is in the battlefield. And that's where everybody is. And being a leader that can lead them and encourage talking, introspection, supporting each other, peer support, that's the gold right there. That's the gold. I put myself in the shoes of the officer who showed up to the CRC training and said something. I put myself in his shoes and I think to myself, okay, I want help. I got to get help. I'm heading to this training. I got to get help. If it's just some standard whatever vendor training that comes in, this isn't happening. But he goes to a training in a spot, and he's been in this unit long enough that he knows what is available to him. He didn't have to ask anybody. He just knows the culture says this is okay. So what does he do? He gets himself to the point where he can actually say something, get himself help, because he knew this was a safe space. And part of that, I'm going to suppose here, I wasn't in the class, but I've seen you teach before. And I know when Jay Houston is front of the class, man, it takes you about 5 minutes and everybody feels like you're like a cousin that they haven't seen in a while. And you're just, and people, and you make it feel like you're not in a classroom. You make it feel like we're a bunch of people hanging out at a tap house or something, just having a drink or talking. And that's something that people don't realize, number one, how important that is, and also how rare that is, Jay. The first time I saw you teach, man, you made me start to cry because you were telling a story that made yourself start to cry. And when I saw that, I was like, man, when you got emotional, and you get emotional when you talk about that with the letter and it, when you, man, that people feel that.
Yep.
If I feel it, the people, the hardened ass guys in there, they're feeling it. They're trying not to, but they feel it.
Yep.
That's what you create, man. That's what you create.
Thank you.
People first, Jay. So tell me about what happened during that situation when you were when you were doing that CRC training there in Georgia.
Man, let me sit back and take a deep breath. So my family, I didn't talk a whole lot about my job, but we had this saying in my house that if I had a bad case or I was looking at a case and I just had enough, if I come home from work and walk in the door, one of the sayings that we had is, how's your day? How was it? And if I said, and I'll have to explain what it means, we done good, which is Southern for we did good, done, we done good. And it's a saying my dad had years ago when I was a kid. My dad was a bass fisherman and he fished a lot of the local tournaments here. And when he got home from his fishing tournaments, I'd ask him, how'd it go, Dad? And if he said, we done good, that means they won. So if I came home and I said, we done good, my family knew it's like, hey, hold up, give me some time. That meant I had a rough day. Give me a little bit of time. And that's what the agreement I had with my family. But I could not stay in that condition for several hours. So let's say I got home at 5 o'clock. I walk in the house. How was your day? We done good. My family would be like, okay, I would get my hugs, Dad, but I was not allowed to stay away from the family for several hours because I had to sit down with dinner. My family had to take care of me. And I had such a good support system with my family. That was the deal. If I had a bad day and came home and said, we done good, my family gave the hugs, backed off, gave me a little bit of time, but I was not allowed to stay in a middle position to where I was depressed or thinking about the stuff that I'd looked at or done that day.
It was your family that says it. That's unacceptable. You cannot stay there.
We had that agreement. Well,
Jay, that is really fantastic because one of the issues, first off, we can unpack this a little bit. One of the issues is people not being able to transition from their work mentality to come home and now change to their personal attitude, which is very difficult. So we talk about rituals and things like that to transition, change your clothes, do something, whatever, have a little routine that decompress for half an hour. But I love the fact that depending on day to day, you're going to come in and say, we done good. Or if you didn't have a bad day, it was all admin or you're at the range all day, then it's different. Mm-hmm. But what really resonates with me, Jay, is the fact that you, the head of this family, have created a family with love, leading with your heart. I don't know your family well, but I can guarantee they are pretty much little Jay Houstons running around, big old smiles and big old hearts. But I think that shows how much your family cares about you in order to not only put something in place where you can say, hey, listen, I need some time, which is great. But then I love the fact that they restrict you. You take your minute. I had a bad day. You go take your minute or however long. And then they reel you back in and they say, This is life. This is family. And that just must be so wonderful to know that you have people that not only are going to do the good stuff for you, but they're also going to stop you from doing the stuff that's not going to be beneficial. Family
Yep.
first, man. That's family first. And that is so commendable for them to hold that space for you. Man, that's wonderful, Jay. I'm so glad, because a lot of people don't have a big support system like that, even in their own family. They can't talk
Well,
about it with anybody. It's feelings.
let me tell you another story. I was lucky enough to have a good support system with my family. My dad was in law enforcement, retired. He spent 45 years in law enforcement before he retired. So he and I come from a law enforcement family. I have a cousin that was a deputy sheriff. I had two cousins that were deputy sheriffs. One of my cousins is now a judge. Both of my sisters are in the service industry. One's a physical therapist, one's a nurse. And so we all knew the stressors. When you're a nurse in an ER or pediatric ER for my youngest sister. So we had this, I don't know what to call it. You just knew. You just knew. If somebody was dealing with something or somebody had a bad week, my parents would text us that my older sister had a patient, something happened to, pray for us, that kind of stuff. And you check in with them. But I want to tell you a story we haven't mentioned yet. If you want to have a successful ICAC division, whether you're the sergeant over investigation, you have one ICAC guy, or you're the ICAC commander, we had 80 affiliates. I think Deb Garner, the ICAC commander, heard in your podcast, had over 260 maybe, plus or minus 10 or 15, excuse me. If you want to have a successful one, you had better be ready to support your staff.
Amen.
You have to support your staff.
Why?
Did you say why?
Yeah, why? I'm playing devil's advocate because there are people like, why? They're doing their job. I'm just the boss. I just got assigned here.
I just need to sign your overtime sheet.
Yeah.
You have to be supportive of them. If you don't give them a good support to where they feel like they can come to you and say, hey, man, look, I've got to be late tomorrow. I've got to take my daughter or my parent or something to the doctor. If you don't have that kind of relationship with them, they're never going to come to you and tell you that they've had enough of this job and these images. They'll never do that. They'll never open up to you.
That's an interesting point.
Yep,
So
they never
basically,
will.
if you come in and they're like, hey, I want to go home early because this stuff really fucked with me, you're like, no, your shift ends.
No, you work
4.
from 8 to 5.
And this is not just law enforcement. This is everywhere in the world. And first responders, you mentioned working in a pediatric ER, which is the absolute most horrifying ER you could ever possibly work, because some people don't make it. They die, and it's horrifying. So that is another piece of trauma, just like internet crimes against children. It's rolling, it's ongoing. She's keeping going back to the ER, and they're witnessing it again and again and again and again. And if you have all this, what did law enforcement do? Push it down. There's another one, push it. And you're going to push it down if you go to your boss and you say, hey, I need a break because I got some families. Nope, you don't have any overtime left, so you're going to stay right here until you're done.
Yep.
That is absolutely telling them right there, you mean less than this case.
Yep.
Your health, your welfare means less than this number that I need in my stat sheet.
I'll give you a case, because I was lucky enough to have the best support staff. I learned from probably some of the best investigators. Our ICAC task force actually started in 2007 in the cybercrime division. But those guys, the forensic examiners and investigators in our cybercrime division, have been working ICAC cases for years prior to me ever even showing up. And that's some of the best bosses and really just personal mentors of mine. So I'll give you a case. I did a search warrant, had a case on a guy. It was from Child Rescue Coalition, suite of tools that the Child Rescue Coalition provides free to law enforcement. I had a case, been a user since 2008, had a case around 2009. And guy was downloading and trading child sexual abuse material, had done it for several months. I send the subpoena out, comes back to his apartment, go there, knock on the door. It's the same scenario. I sit down and visit with the guy concerning his online activity, which is my coined phrase for I sat down and interviewed him. And during the interview, he admits to it, says what platforms he was using, told us where it was. And as we're talking during the interview, one question that one of my One of my coworkers, I'd never even thought to ask this, but one of my coworkers said, when you're interviewing someone and they admit to it, mention maybe I know more about stuff you've been doing, and see if they tell you they have it hidden on an SD card in a shoe or a pocket
Yeah.
or something. I'm talking to this guy, and the search warrant that we executed is about 3 miles from my house that I'm sitting at right now. It's only 3 miles from my house. I'm interviewing the guy. We're talking. And I said, look, do you feel like there's anything else that you need to tell me? Any more email addresses, any more SD cards or anything like that? Anything that you've been doing online or in person? And he turned and looked at me and he said, I need to tell you something. I said, okay. And he said, this past Saturday, I went to the local mall and I would walk around the mall and I would follow women who had young kids with them. And I would pretend that I was shopping with them. And if they went into the kids section, I would go into the kids section and I'd watch them. And he said, I followed several moms around the mall in a 2 or 3 hour period. And I said, okay, what else did you do? And he said, when they went outside, walked outside the doors to leave this local mall, he said, I would stand on the curb and fantasize about getting in the car with them and going home and molesting the child. I was like, okay, but you didn't. No, I didn't. I said, okay. So I said, what time were you at the mall? And he said, oh, I think it was between about 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Yep. I said, okay. This guy didn't have any access to children, so this was just a fantasy to him. So what he did, 3 days before we did the search warrant, he's at the mall following women around with kids. So we get finished with the interview, admits to everything. We take him to jail. And I walked up to my boss and he's like, my gosh, can you believe what he said? And I said, man, I need to go home. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I need a minute. And he said, Jay, what's wrong? His name's Keith Levitt. I said, Keith, I was at the mall with my kids Saturday from 12 to 2.
Dude.
I was at the mall with my children the same time, with maybe an hour, that I was at the same mall with him and I'm walking around with my kids. Yep. I don't think I've ever told my family that. I don't think my wife and children have ever heard that story.
How does that make you feel?
Oh, man, let's be vulnerable. If we're going to tell the truth, let's tell the truth, right?
Tell the
On
truth.
this podcast.
Yes.
I wanted to punch him in the face. I wanted to hurt him, but you couldn't. You can't do that. You're in law. You can't subject your own penalties on this guy.
I remember a case where I had to go interview a person. Him and his wife owned an adult assisted living community, basically handicapped adults that have mental issues, physical issues, all kind of stuff. His wife actually went into the computer one day and saw there was some kids up on there. So she calls the police. He says it's all pop-up stuff. We're going to interview this guy in his house, in his kitchen. I'm asking him at the table, okay, so what are these search terms that you were using? Because I finally got him to open up. I'm at his kitchen table. He offered me a cup of coffee. And I ask him, I'm like, what are the search terms that you search for? And he goes, and he's got his cup of coffee in his hand. He's like, preteen pussy, takes a sip, bald cunt, 10-year-old suck. And Jay, as he's doing this, I am visualizing myself coming up over the table, hands out, and Jean-Claude Van Damme snapping this guy's neck. Just right, fuck this guy is all I could think right there. But like you said, you can't show any of that. You can't. You can't show it.
No.
And that's a stress in of itself, is having this intense feeling. And then how do you share that with somebody? Listen, I interviewed this guy and he happened to be at the mall walking around at the same time my fucking family and kids were there.
Yep.
Like, how do you can't tell people that, because what's the unique stress? Because someone's going to go, you don't know if he was about your kids and who even knows. But as your investigative mind, I know exactly what's going through your mind. Let me ask you this question to follow up on that. So this guy walks out on the curb and then he fantasizes about going home and molesting the kid. So what's the next iteration of that, right? He gets the balls to do that, right? Now he approaches a family, manipulates them some way to end up going with them, right? That's
Yep.
the next iteration of this.
I'm going to tell you one more thing about this case. After he walked out to the curb and fantasized about going home with that family and molest that kid, he would go into the bathroom and masturbate. He went to the public restroom in the mall and masturbate.
Do you believe this? Do you believe that given the right set of circumstances, any one of these offenders will touch and hurt a child?
Absolutely.
I do too. I think they're on a continuum.
Yeah.
And we catch them somewhere along that continuum. Hopefully we catch them before a child gets hurt. But along that continuum, there's a hands-on offense.
I'll end that story with this. Because I had supportive coworkers that had years of experience of doing this in my life, my boss was like, "Hey man, look, I got you. Go home. I'll call you in a little while. We'll take care of him." And they took care of everything. They took him to the jail and I went to the house and my kids got home from school and I grabbed them and we went to Chick-fil-A or whatever we did that night. And it was because I think a lot of the reasons why I put a lot of the mental health things in place for our ICAC task force is simply because those guys, sort of old school, that have been around for a while, were at a place of vulnerability where they were willing to pour into my life and tell me things that would happen. Now, look, I started January of 2008, which, if I remember correctly, was on a Wednesday. I started January 2nd. So my boss comes in, he's boom, here's 5 cases. Like, okay. So I start going through them. I'm like, whoa, I'd never seen CSAM before. So I'm looking at this picture. I'm like, ooh, that's okay. All right. Start diving into those 5 cases. I'm getting lined up how I'm going to work them and stuff like that. So the weekend comes, I go home for the weekend. Monday rolls around. I go up to the office and I'll never forget it. I sat down in my chair, ready for a strong week. And I look at those 5 cases and I sit back in my chair and I just sit there for a minute. And I literally think to myself, I don't think I can do this. I've got 2 young daughters. The pictures were of young girls. I don't think I can do this. Wow. So, you know me, I'm a man of faith and I pray. And so I prayed and I was like, God, you got me here. What do I do? And then I just felt this sense inside of me that, hey, I put you here. Let's go. You have all the tools that you need to be successful at this. And I'll never forget it. I sat up in my chair and I literally said out loud, if I'm not, who is? Let's go.
I love that. Now, that's not to say if you see the images and you're in Jay's position, you're like, I don't think I can do this. And you pray and you just can't do it.
Absolutely.
Don't lean in and do it anyway. Destroy yourself.
Yep.
You come first. If you look at this day 1 or case 2 and it's not, and it's going to fuck you up and you know it, and you feel that already, yeah, you might want to go somewhere else. And Jay, is there any shame in this? Shame in seeing a couple images and being like, I can't do this.
Nope. I'll give you another story here. Exactly what you're saying. On behalf of Child Rescue Coalition, I went to Brazil and taught a CPS course, Child Protection System course. And the classroom was full. There are 25 people in there, all Brazilian federal police and civil police. And we're teaching this class. Everything's going great. The class is going great. Everybody's learning. And in every class that you teach, whether it's CPS for Child Rescue Coalition or GRIFA or investigative techniques, every class that you teach, at some point, the light bulbs are going to turn on, right?
Yeah.
Maybe day 2, maybe day 3. Yep. But when those light bulbs turn on, everybody gets an energy, right? Yep. Mm-hmm. Everybody gets that energy and you're like, we're here. They understand what I'm saying. So day 4 comes around and the light bulbs go off and people get excited and they're identifying targets and stuff. And day 4, we ask each attendee, are you going to use this system when you leave? And what can I do as an instructor to make you successful? And one of the guys in the class said, I can't do this. And he chose not to work these cases. And I am so proud of that guy. He was a civil police officer and his boss was in the class and he had all these federal officers in there.
Oh man.
And he literally said, I can't do this. The organizers said they needed a full class of 20 or 25, however many it was. And they pretty much told me I was coming to this class. You know, the whole voluntold thing. And he said, I think about that guy, man. I think about it.
Think about how difficult that would have. Imagine you go to a class that's been your department paid for you to travel and all this stuff. The obligation, you're being paid to attend this. This is training to do a job that your department is counting on you to do for all this time. How many people are going to sit there and just suck it up? To have that ability to introspect, and not only introspect, but then have action. Say something. Because there's a ton of people, I did it, that this is killing me, but I'm not saying anything. I'm just going to push it down in there and I'll hold on to it. They don't say anything. But man, to do it in front of your chain of command, nobody does this. If you're in law enforcement, think for a second about doing that. Imagine you have a brand new assignment and the sergeant, lieutenant, commander, and the chief that assigned you to that are all sitting in the same room with you. How difficult it would be to raise your hand and say, I can't do this. And then what was the response, Jay, when he said that? Was everyone like, oh, what a puss?
No. I would not have allowed them to do that.
Good.
Let me tell you what was so instructors, and you know this because we've taught together for 3-4 years.
And it's been wonderful,
4 years. 4 years.
Love teaching with my boy, Jay.
Man, I learned so much from you. So anyway, as instructors, we took a step back because now it becomes let them discuss this, steer the conversation a little bit, and to a positive way to say, this guy made the right decision.
Absolutely.
Could you imagine this guy not wanting to do it, but being forced to do it for a year or 2 years or 3 years?
And there's people that are in that position because they don't say, I can't do this. And the boss says, there's nobody else to do this. You're the only one that knows computers, so you have to do this. How crazy is that? You're the only one that knows technology, so you need to watch children raped day in and out.
We paid $5,000 for you to attend this class, and then we paid $20,000 for the tools for you to use this. And now you're telling me you don't want to use it?
Yep. Well, yeah,
like,
that's...
I
invested all this money in you. I invested all this time in you. I invested all this effort in you. And now you're just going to say, nope. Imagine the pressure of trying to say something like that. And that is the example of what a person needs to do. Jay, whether it's your 5th image or your 500 millionth image, when it gets to that point and you say, I can't do this, say something. But hopefully it doesn't get to that point. And that's what this is all about. We have to figure out a way that people do this job and they leave and they're healthy. And all they have to deal with is the typical retirement stuff that you have to deal with. Because you stack this on top of it, and it is quite literally a recipe for disaster and death and sorrow.
So I do want to transition just a bit.
Let's do it,
I want
man.
to
Let's
tell
move.
you my
Whatever you say.
favorite story from teaching a class.
All right.
And man, get a little emotional. So Child Rescue Coalition calls me up. Hey, Georgia ICAC task force would like a training and I want you to teach it. No problem. Go to this training class. And I'm teaching the class. It's me and another instructor from GBI, and we're teaching the class. And
how long was the class, Jay?
It's 5 days.
Okay, week-long class. Got it.
I think it was 5 days. Anyway, 4 or 5 days. Whatever. I'm teaching the class. Everything's going great. Now, people that are instructors may understand what I'm about to say. People that are not instructors may not understand this. But one of the funny things about teaching is every class has a theme, right? Some are the more technical classes and some are a bit boring. And
Yep.
this class was the funny class. They were engaged and they were a lot of fun. It was the class that you love. The group of attendees were the ones that you love to teach. They're engaging, they're laughing at stupid jokes you're telling.
Yeah.
And
That's a great feeling too. Great feeling.
Yep. And they were from all over Georgia. Some had never even met each other, worked together, but knew each other. So it was like a everybody party, get together kind of thing. Class was great. Also, as an instructor, you have to distance yourself from the attendees because it's their training and it's their task force. And one of the things I learned from the great instructors is this is business. So you need to do whatever it takes for you to be successful every day. And if you eat a hearty breakfast, and I don't ever eat lunch just because I don't want to get tired, go eat a big. So then after class, I would go eat a sensible dinner, maybe have a drink or two if I felt like it, and then go to my room and I'd study my material for the next day. I don't care how many times I've taught something, I'd go over my material, make sure everything works. So Friday morning, last day of class, me and my co-instructor from GBI, we go eat breakfast, which was inside the hotel. All of us stayed in the same hotel. So the attendees and the instructors, we stayed at the same hotel. So we eat breakfast. We have a great breakfast. We walk out in the lobby and 6 or 8 of the attendees are standing in the lobby. So one of them, I'm like, hey guys, you want to walk over with us? And they were like, yeah, come on. So it was like a 10, 15 minute walk right down from the hotel. And one of the guys grabs my arm and pulls me to the back, and everybody's walking in front of us. He said, hey man, I got to tell you about a scenario that happened last night. I was like, all right, what happened? And he said, I'd take a guy's gun away from him. I said, excuse me? He said, yeah, man, he made some statements that he was going through some things and he felt suicidal. And I said, okay. And he said, yeah, he said there were, I can't remember if he said 2 or 3 of them that walked this guy back to his hotel, took his gun, and then stayed with him the whole night.
I didn't hear that part of the story.
They stayed with him the whole night. Now, I don't know if this was at 2 a.m. and they got him back to his room if it was 10 p.m. I don't know.
Doesn't matter. They didn't leave him alone. They never left him alone.
So,
Wow.
He said, what do we need to do? Don't worry about it. I got you. Because I'm a member of Mississippi has a program called LEAPS, Law Enforcement Alliance of Peer Support. And I'm on the LEAPS team. So I knew GBI had a LEAPS team. I got with the co-instructor, Steve. As soon as we got to the classroom, pulled my co-instructor to the side. His name's Steve Blackwell. He's a retired GBI agent, been a CPS instructor for years. Great guy. So I pulled him to the side. I said, hey, we got a problem. This guy, they took his gun away. This is what he said. And he said, okay. I said, do you have a LEAPS? He said, yep. Call him. Own it. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to teach class. We're going to go for an hour and a half. When we go on break, then you better let me know something, but I'm not letting this guy out of my sight. Perfect. He goes to the back office in the building that we were in, makes some phone calls. LEAP shows up and they get game plan together. And about 45 minutes into the class, Steve comes in and he says, hey man, can I talk to you outside? Now I'm teaching. I'm talking, teaching. He comes in, he taps down on the shoulder. Hey man, will you come with me? Sure. He gets up and walks out. I know what's going on.
Yeah. You know the
5
conversation.
or 6 other people in the class know what's going on. But there's about 15 or 20 that have no idea why this guy was just walked out of the classroom.
Right.
I'm talking, I'm teaching. The 5 that knew started looking around. 10 or 15 or 20 that didn't know started talking to each other.
Yeah.
Like, what's going on? And I just stopped class. And I said, all right, guys. I said, I want you in this room to know that there are probably 6 or 8 heroes in this room right now. And I can't tell you why. But I'm going to take a 15-minute break. If you guys want to stay in here and talk, it's up to you. It's your task force. I'll be back in here in 15 minutes. And I walked out of that classroom, and I've only told one other person this. I walked out of that classroom, went straight to the bathroom, and bawled my eyes out. Just because we had saved the guy. We had saved this guy.
Absolutely.
They had saved this guy. They saved him. He was, what'd he say? What was it, 2 pounds away from an 8-pound trigger pull?
Yes, that's what he said.
Yeah.
How did they react when you said there's heroes in this class?
Well, of course, the 6 or 8 had probably never been told they were heroes ever.
yeah, which is
So they're
sad.
looking at me like, man, he just called me a hero.
Yeah.
And then the other people had no idea. They're looking around, what is going on? After the break, I go back into the classroom and everybody comes back in and people are grouped up talking and stuff. And I realized real quick that they needed some time. They needed some time together as a task force. And the person to be in there with them was Steve Blackwell, the GBI agent that was my co-instructor, but he couldn't because he was dealing with that, with coordinating the whole leech thing. I said, guys, look, let me just get through these couple of hours of instruction. I'll make it quick. It was like interview and interrogation kind of thing, sealing up a good case, that kind of stuff. So we got through that. And I said, all right, I'm gonna turn this class over to you guys. This is your class. And by this time, it was probably the lunchtime hour.
Right.
And by this time, they coordinated everything for this guy. And what I later found out, I didn't know this. I had about a 6 hours drive back to the house. So I shook everybody's hand, gave them all that stuff like you do in an instructor.
Yeah.
It's just such a powerful moment, I know, for me and the people in the class, that while I was in the bathroom, our instructors for CPS, we have an instructors group. And if there's a rescue or if there's some question or something, we send out instructors here. And I sent in that instructors group, I said, I can't tell you why, but we just had a rescue in class. Of course, I couldn't talk about it. I can talk about it now because Debbie has talked about it and the guys have spoken to their task force. But I cannot tell you how proud I am of that guy. I can't tell you how proud I am of that task force and GBI's leads for taking that guy straight to the place he needed to be.
Absolutely. He
It was
100% was going to kill himself. 100%.
100%. Now, I didn't find out till later that his agency was coming down.
Oh my God.
I didn't find out till later about that. And it goes back to the old school way of thinking.
Yep.
Where
That's how we've always done it.
That's how we've always done it. Somebody, they can't handle it.
You know what that is, Jay? You know what that is? 100%. That's some lazy sergeant. Now he's going to have to fill out a bunch of paperwork. Now he's going to have to do this and that. And it pisses him off because all he gives a shit about is himself. That's where that comes from. You caused me a bunch of trouble. You caused me What about your officer that would be dead? He was going to kill himself. You want to talk about fucking trouble? Your guy went and killed himself in a training.
Yeah.
How stupid and short-sighted and fucking petty are you? Debbie's situation, the instructors, everybody there, Jay, I'm sorry. Everybody involved in that is a hero, including you, including the person that pulled you aside and said, hey, this happened. I had to take someone's gun away. Everybody that stayed with that man is a hero.
Yeah,
and they are part of saving that person. It's a very compelling story, but please contemplate what it took to get that man to that place in his life. Think about what the horrors of this job can do to you, that you can't, the only thing you can think of to get out is darkness.
When you have a coworker that comes to you, or let's say you're a supervisor, you have an employee that comes to you and says, look, let's say it's a female, but she just had a baby. And she's working ICAC case. She's looking at this stuff and it's babies, and she just had a baby. And They come to you and they're like, hey, I might need to take a break. Man, you need to jump up and grab them and hug on them and find them something else to do.
Amen, brother.
Yeah.
Amen.
Man, we go through these pits and valleys throughout our career, whether you're working homicide or burglary or narcotics or ICAC, you're going to go through these things, hills and valleys. And if you're on top of a hill, you may only need 30 or 45 minutes or an hour a day just to take care of yourself, whether it's go get a coffee or eat dinner with your family but there are times, man, when you're in that bottom, when nothing's going right, you got a pile of cases. There's too much a month left at the end of the money. And you got pressures on top of you where, man, you might need to go to your boss, and their bosses need to be receptive of you coming to them and going, hey, I'm going through a hard time. I don't need to talk about it right this second, but man, I need to come to work at 10 a.m. or leave at 3 or something like that.
The first thought when someone comes to you and says, I need a break, if the first thought in your mind is, what about your cases? Then you're fucking in the wrong position. You're
Yep.
not leading the way you need to be leading this.
Yep.
Your first thought should be, how can I help you? What
Yep.
do you need? How can I help? I'm going to do everything in my power to make that happen. It can't
Yep.
be, but what about your cases? Because guess what, supervisor? They're already thinking that themselves. What about my cases?
Yep.
They already have that pressure. Don't put that pressure back on them. They have this, yet they're still coming to you.
Yep.
Hold space and let them speak freely.
Yep.
You saw a video that makes you feel about your family, we flush you out of the unit. No, we're going to make little adjustments. Just like when you're shooting a firearm, we're going to make these little tiny adjustments, and we're going to practice these adjustments, and we're going to learn muscle memory. And before you know it, you can get through this healthy. If the environment isn't right, you can't get healthy. You need other people. This is a community. This is a group effort. And a lot of cops isolate themselves. They're like, this is my job, my cases, my thing. And that's great because it focuses you on work but we have to realize this is a team. And without a culture or that feeling of, if I say something, it'll be okay. What do you think was going through this guy's head when he's telling somebody this? Oh my God, it's going to be the most shameful thing. That's what you're thinking in your mind. And what was the reality? The reality was everybody cares about you. They all want the best for you. They're going to do what it takes to get the best for you. If you're listening to this and you're in this position and you have something that you need to talk about or something that you think is important to either help yourself or help other people, you have to be the person to take that step. If not you, then who?
Absolutely.
Action all starts within yourself, right?
No.
I am sure this is one story of thousands upon
Oh, yeah.
thousands throughout the years. Thousands.
Yep.
Some that we'll never hear about. No one will ever know. But what is amazing to me is that man is alive today. He is walking this earth. He's got a family. He's got possibilities.
I'll add one more thing to this. If you're in this profession, you absolutely have to take care of yourself. You have to. Because as things stack up, as the problems at home or money or whatever, as these things stack up, a situation is going to present itself where you have got to be on your A game. You're going to walk into a house to do a search warrant on an ICAC case, and you're going to rescue a child. And you've got all this other stuff going on in the background that you haven't dealt with. It's been going on for years. You've got all this stuff going on. And when you walk in a house and there's a kid being abused there, you have got to be on your A game. You've got to have everything ready, because that's when the 911 happens.
Yeah. But how do you get there? How do you get to that A game? I want to listen to Jay. I want to bring my A game. How do I do that?
Number one, listen to this podcast. And listen, folks, take Eric up on his offer. He didn't plainly say it, but I'll plainly say it. If you're dealing with somebody, talk to somebody, call him. He just gave you permission to.
Yeah.
And Eric's got all the resources in the world to reach out to somebody else and get some help. Let me tell you another way to get ICAC folks to open up. Hey man, you worked any good cases lately?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
If
Yes.
they're an investigator,
Yes.
have you worked any good cases lately? And another one for forensic examiners is, hey man, what's the biggest case you had last?
And what does that do, Jay? Okay, so that's a great thing to ask, but why are those questions poignant and so important?
Because it gets them talking. And then what happens in that exchange is they tell you that they had a case where whatever this scenario is, and then you have the same case because it's generally about the same kind of story. Guy downloads some stuff they shouldn't download. You get a search warrant, go to their house, find them, put them in jail.
Yeah.
You find it or don't find it. And it starts that camaraderie to where they're like, yeah, man, I had a case where this happened. And I had one like that, but this was the deal. Have you arrested the guy that was nude? Because we've arrested several that when you get to the house, they're completely naked.
And
Oh,
what yeah.
and then you
And
just get them talking.
and what's great about that, Jay, is that everybody wants to talk about that cool case that they did. Everybody wants to talk about it. And now you're giving them an opportunity. You're interested in it, and you're an audience that understands it.
Yep.
Because how different is that story when it's to somebody that's in the civilian world?
Yep.
So just doing that is telling somebody, I want to know about you. I care about your work. And that immediately opens people up. It's
Yep.
just the slightest thing to show caring. And it's not a lot of effort.
And especially for forensic examiners, because investigators, you get to go do surveillance and not have to look at the material for a
Mhm.
few days while you're doing your investigation and stuff. But forensic examiners just sitting there scrolling, scrolling, scrolling. And if you start talking to forensic examiners about their last case and you can just get them to open up, you can talk to them about computers. What kind of computer are you using? Well, we went with this. What software are you using? And just start talking to them about it. And
And it's
man,
not and please, it's not some manipulation tactic to get them to do something. It's
absolutely.
genuine interest.
Yep.
Take
Yep.
genuine interest like someone would take genuine interest in you. If someone you didn't know wanted to hear your coolest story, right? Take
Yep.
interest.
That's exactly
Take
right.
genuine interest in other people. And you know what the most beautiful side effect of that is? You know what that is. Then they take interest in you.
Mhm.
And now you're building a community.
Yep.
And that spreads. That type of, just like the anger and the tension. You've walked into the office in the morning when you can feel it. You can feel the tension because somebody's upset or something went wrong and everyone's pissed off. Like the whole tone of the day is jacked up because of one person. Guess what? You can do that in the reverse.
Mhm.
You can bring in pleasantness. In the face of all this horror, you can bring in a little bit of pleasantness. And that's what Jay Houston does. And man, when you start teaching a class, brother, you're fun loving and you have an ability to teach very difficult things with levity.
Yep.
And that's a very difficult thing to know how to do. And I don't think it's something you can be taught. I think you just have to have the big heart. You can be taught how to teach people. You're the instructor like that. People immediately feel this person is here for me. And you don't have
Yep.
to be an instructor with a group of people. It can be you and your buddy, you and the guy in your squad, you and your supervisor, you and your subordinate. You can have this.
Yep.
It's a gift. You got to give it to yourself. You can't unless you care about yourself and you take care of yourself first. And
Yeah.
you feel you're worth it, Jay. That's the big thing.
Man, that's so big. And something you said the other day when we were on the phone. Number one, you've got to love yourself. You have to
Yes.
give yourself permission to love yourself. That's the thing. Number two is you have to know that at some point you have to make a decision that what we do is a job, but it doesn't define you. Now, when you're doing your job, you give it your all, 100%. Some weeks, 80 hours, some weeks, 40. When it's time to work, it's time to work. But you need to give yourself permission to go home and be at home. You also have to be vulnerable enough to take constructive criticism.
Yes. Yes. You have to be able to. And I got 3 text messages from students saying, thank you for your vulnerability teaching.
Aren't those the best?
It is the best because that means that you connected on a human level with them. If you're an instructor and you can't connect with a student, sh- go to humanity.
Yep.
Go to the humanity. That's all you got to go to, and you'll connect with them.
Yep.
Everybody's a human.
What did we forget? You want me to do
No,
my introduction?
yeah, no, we didn't even do that. Tell me how you got into law enforcement and how you went from law enforcement into crimes against children.
So, went to the police. I had no intentions of going to the police academy. My dad was a police officer. He was actually the assistant chief at Jackson Police Department. Been in law enforcement. I think if the story's correct, my mom was pregnant with me when my dad decided to go to the police academy. So I was born when my dad was in the police academy. So my whole life, family law enforcement, and my mom's a teacher. I decided in 1997, I was working at UPS, believe it or not, driving a braille truck. And I went to my dad and I said, I want to go to the police academy. He said, are you sure? I said, yes, sir. I want to go to the police academy.
You should have listened to your dad.
Oh, I hear about that from my wife all the time. Go to the police academy, and Jackson's one of those agencies where when they hire you, you go to the police academy. You don't go out on the road. You don't go to dispatch. You go straight to the police academy. So I graduated the police academy in 97, was in the FTO program, like everyone is, for several months. And one night, an officer for Jackson Police Department who was FTOing one of my classmates, they go to a domestic violence call. And you usually send 2 cars because there were 2 cops in the car, a senior officer, a FTO, and my classmate. They didn't feel the need to send 2 cars. The officer goes up on the front porch in a domestic. The wife comes running out. He's got a gun. An officer is standing on the porch, and the guy shoots the officer and kills him on the front porch. And my classmate finds concealment and returns fire. The guy retreats back inside of the house. My classmate, who I've now spent I can't remember if it was 12 or 16 weeks at the police academy, had this bond with him, just screams on the radio, officer down, something none of us want to hear on the radio.
No.
So my training officer and I were around the corner, and we pull up there, officer down on the front porch. My classmate is just to the right of the porch. And now, remind you, my father is the assistant chief of the police department at this time. Officer down, they call the chief, they call assistant chiefs, they call deputy chiefs. Now, I didn't learn this. I'd never heard this until my dad told me this 10 years later. I never knew this happened. But they call my father at home, and they're like, hey, chief, look, officer down, precinct 3, which was the precinct I was in. And he said, precinct 3. And they said, yeah. They said, who's the officer? We can't say. And he said, was it Jay Houston? And she's, hold on. Was it Jay Houston? Yes, it was Jay Houston. Oh. So my dad was told that his son was dead on the front porch, having only been out of the police academy for 4 months. So my dad doesn't say anything to my mom. He takes off. They go to the command post, and at the command post, he finds out it was not me. I was there because the officer was on the front porch. 4 of us got together and decided we were going to get that officer. So we stack and get up there front porch, get him off there, back away, and try to get him some help, but he had passed away. And I'm just a young officer. I'm 4 months out of the academy. They taught me how to do push-ups. They taught me how to run a breathalyzer. They taught me laws. They taught me all this, how to polish boots, how to drive a car. They taught me all this stuff. They didn't teach me how to deal with an officer down.
Yeah.
So processing this in my mind, because of our actions, we ended up getting a Distinguished Service Award presented to us by the chief and the assistant chiefs and the deputy chiefs. Mm-hmm. And the award they gave me, the chief didn't hand it to me. The assistant chief, which was my father, he hands me my award. It was a great emotional thing. And then on the way home, I get to the house, and I've got this very nice plaque and award and stuff. And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm proud of this. The officer died. And it was one of those points where it was like, you've just been awarded the second highest medal afforded to an officer. The only one higher than that is line of duty death. And I was like, man, I need to he told somebody about this, and I called my pops, called my dad and talked to him about it. He's like, it's normal. You're gonna have some issues dealing with the terrible parts of the world, the terrible things that happen. And you've got to put yourself in a position to where when you go through that, you have to go deal with it. Just go talk to someone. I was able to lean into my father for some advice and him lean into me, and was a young officer, not only as a young officer, but my father. And I look back at him just so thankful for him leaning into me enough as a father to son and saying, hey, let's talk about this.
And how'd you get to be an ICAC commander?
I left Jackson and I went to work for a small police department, maybe 40 officers, regional police department just north of Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
Then I had the opportunity to go to the sheriff's office and work for the sheriff's office where I live, and started working narcotics, which was great. But as we all know, narcotics is nonstop.
Yeah,
it is nonstop. It's always a wire or a surveillance or dope buys.
Yep.
And in January of 2008, I got the opportunity to go to the Attorney General's office and work ICAC investigations. So I started working ICAC investigations on our ICAC task force. At the time, there was only the ICAC commander. Well, Department of Justice, OJJDP, wanted you to assign an alternate commander. So my commander came to me and was like, hey, do you want to be the alternate commander? So that's how it started.
right.
And I worked for that commander. Her name's Jean Vaughn. I'm still friends to this day. Highly respect her. I think she's 6, 7 years, 5 or 6 years as the commander. And then she retired. And then I took over the task force.
And then you stayed there until 2021, you said?
Yep. So I retired in 21.
What's your proudest accomplishment in that time?
I think the proudest accomplishment is that so I'm from Mississippi. And when I say that, people think there's a stigma or profile, if you will, people from Mississippi. And I always pushed our task force affiliates that when someone heard your name or knew that you were with the Mississippi ICAC task force, that you were forced to be reckoned with. If you walked into a conference and told someone that you worked for the Mississippi ICAC task force, they better hold you to the highest courtesy and dignity and respect, because we were forced to be reckoned with. I do honestly believe that we were one of the top 10 task forces in the U.S. I firmly believe that, because the affiliates were doing presentations to schools and killing it, man. They were doing phenomenal work. The forensics, we have one of our guys that was like number 2 in the Secret Service computer forensics examiners for the whole U.S. And he's in Mississippi. I mean, it's just guys like that, man, that they were no holes barred, man. They were ready to work.
I love that you say they need to know we're a force to be reckoned with, because what that does, that builds pride in the individual investigators. Absolutely, because they're going to work hard, they're going to make good cases, and then people are going to want to hear about those cases. And when you feel pride like that in your work, in your team, it's very easy then to transition to that into loving yourself. When you realize how important the work you're doing is, when you set this up where people can talk about it and we're badasses. And you know that when you're part of a group of people, when we worked with Griffey together, we got out at something, we're a bunch of fucking badasses walking around. We know this. Love that. What would you say to someone who's listening to this podcast 10 years from now? What information would you want to say today that they would hear then in the future to help the next generation beyond this next generation?
Yeah, mute the audio on the video files. First thing, mute the audio on video files.
Yes, sir.
The second thing is do whatever it takes to take care of yourself. Whatever it takes. If that's running, hiking, if that's outdoor sports, if that's working out, if it's cooking, if it's your family, because there's going to be times when you're going to need more time for yourself, because you're going to have a case overload. You're going to have a lot of stresses going on. And that's especially when you need to take care of yourself. Now,
I agree.
Yep.
I would say
okay.
schedule this time
Yeah.
and make it a
Yep.
non-negotiable time to help heal whatever it is. You need to schedule self-care. And
Yep.
it's the quickest thing to, oh, I'm too busy.
Mhm.
You don't do these hobbies you used to do anymore because these things you love to do, you don't do them anymore because you don't have time. You have to
Yep.
make the time. That is self-care. A hobby is self-care. Make
Yep.
the time. You're worth it.
I retired in 2021, 13 years in ICAC. And then, of course, started working for Griffi in 2020 as a contract instructor. Right when COVID hit, you guys put Griffi training online. And you remember doing all that stuff. Griffi went online for online training, became a contract instructor for about 2 years, and then was brought on full time as the U.S. law enforcement liaison for Griffi. Now, this whole time, I've always been an instructor for Child Rescue Coalition when it was CPS technology years ago, and have always taught classes, tried to teach people how to capture and focus in on the most egregious offenders. You get brought a stack of cases, and we know from the last 3.5 years post COVID that these cases are just ever increasing.
Yeah.
Like, don't know what to do with all of them. And you've got to have a way to focus in the ones that are most likely a hands-on offender. October of last 2023, left Griffi and am now the director of training for Child Rescue Coalition.
I don't care who you are. Put it against the crew that I worked with and the training that we provided and just the incredible humanity and the
Yeah.
way Jay Houston connecting with people over Zoom. You can't even see their faces and they're just a name on a list. And they can only text back. And we had the best crew. And Jay, you were one of the best people for holding people's attention when it was so hard. It's such technical stuff. And your levity and the way that you treat everybody. It's not just a thing that you do for this person or that person. Every single person I've seen you interact with, you are Jay Houston. You bring Jay 100%. And it's infectious. It got into me and I love it. I love your attitude.
Man, listen, I can't take credit for all of that because I never knew that you could play music during a break in a class. I never thought about that. Just to lighten the mood.
Yeah.
I didn't know that you could do stuff that we're doing. We have fun.
Yeah, we did.
Fun. And it was, the attendees loved it. And you make a joke or something in the chat box or something on a Teams meeting, which is so boring sitting there watching your screen. Yep. And before long, you'd have 4 or 5 people just cutting up.
Yeah, they're blowing up jokes and and then jokes start happening. And just like you said, there's a theme in every class. It's like they're online too. If people are engaged in an online class, you can actually feel that 100%. But so now you're the director of training for Child Rescue Coalition. So what does that entail? What do you do? And what are you teaching?
For the U.S. Department of Homeland Security is sponsoring a class. It'll be federal, state, and local Argentinian police officers there. My co-instructor is from Quito, Ecuador. He was actually in a class that I taught in Quito several years ago as a phenomenal instructor. And we teach cops how to use our free technology, our free software tools to identify and arrest those that want to download and trade child sexual abuse material online. We also, with these end-to-end encrypted apps, we have technology to a certain degree in there, and investigators, once this is deployed internationally, will have the opportunity to maybe combat some child exploitation online with end-to-end encrypted apps. So we have several contract instructors all over the world, coordinate them, update the training, everything a director of training would do. Eric, I have said this for years, that the forensics tools should be forced by the ICAC task forces all over the world. They should be forced. I wish we could write a law for certain mental health features in there. Blur, need to be able to blur a picture, right? Audio and video files off by default, break timers, hash sets, all of these things, these forensics programs should be forced to have those in there. It's going to cost money and more programming for them to do that. But I guarantee you, if we came together as investigators, forensic examiners, we came together and said, I'm not buying your tool until you do this. Why not make the CVIP submission easy? An easy button.
Yeah, because
My
that's
God,
just
how
as
much
more.
time have we spent submitting CVIP?
Yeah.
Turning it to a CD.
Yep.
Not Nick's fault, not anybody else's fault. Why can't we make this easy?
Innovate the
And
system.
some
Yep.
tools just will not do it. And I promise you, if I was a user and I was an ICAC commander and I wanted that button in a tool and they wouldn't do it, I'd tell them I'm not buying your product.
I like that.
Tell them, I'm not buying your product. Make it easier on us.
Yeah. Where's Jay Houston in 5 years?
Probably still with Child Rescue Coalition somehow.
Off in some faraway land teaching people.
Yep.
All right. It's been 2 hours, man. We've been going for way too long, but I absolutely love talking with you. I really do. I appreciate you taking the time to come on here and be vulnerable and tell some stories that are going to help other people. Some private stories, some emotional stories. And that's all about vulnerability. And you are literally the guy that you're let me think for 1 second. Yeah, I don't know any other instructor that is as vulnerable teaching in front of anybody as you. And I mean that from my heart. And I think you know it, though. I think you know it's true.
Too, brother. Let me just say one more time. Thank you for doing this podcast. Thank you so much for doing this. I firmly believe that as this progression continues, that people are going to be helped.
Yes.
They're going to listen to this and be like, you know what? I am normal.
Yep.
I've got all this anxiety. I've got all these cases, but you know what? I'm normal.
Yes.
And that's what we're looking for.
It is my pleasure to be doing this, Jay. And it's my pleasure and my honor. It is now my passion to just get stories out and let people see this from all different perspectives so they can understand and expose the humanity.
Yeah, brother.
Period. I appreciate you, Jay. You're a badass, dude. Keep doing what you're doing. Enjoy your trip to Buenos Aires. All right, brother. Appreciate you. Cheers. Bye. Another huge thank you to my friend Jay Houston for being on my podcast and being so open and vulnerable about his experiences. Jay truly has a helping heart, and I think that's undeniable. Thank you for listening. And if you would like to support this podcast, please continue to listen and share it with anybody who you think might benefit from listening to this. And as always, if you know someone who needs to hear this podcast and needs to hear it anonymously, do not hesitate to email me at harmlessthepodcast@gmail.com. Thank you.